Hi, James. Just going to go through your post here and hopefully you can get an idea of what I'm thinking as I'm looking at and reading your post. In general, it's good. You covered the important concepts and you used some resources, especially your textbook. I mean, I can't say this enough. I'm going to say it over and over again that the textbook is really essential to this course because it really presents the concepts and the correct definitions of things so that when you get to your papers, you're writing in the right context. Like when we talk about ethics, we're talking about environmental ethics, and there's ethical principles that are discussed in your textbook that are very important to understand. In the first chapter, we're essentially talking about values. So it looks like you did a nice job of distinguishing between the fact that there's direct and there's indirect values. And when you're talking about oceans, there's lots of different ways that we can value the oceans, and you're absolutely right. Like one thing that you can take from the oceans that has a market value is seafood, and that's one resource that is utilitarian, and we can directly value it because we kind of know what the price is of a lobster or a fish, depending on where you are in the world. So that's good. And then the indirect value that you mentioned is scarcity, and scarcity value is kind of a tricky one. We value something because there isn't very much of it left. So a lot of times it's sort of like thinking about something like an endangered species or a rare exotic hardwood that takes hundreds of years to grow, or mineral resources. Like in essence, gold is valuable because it's scarce and also because it's fairly useful. But in some respects, there are things that are very scarce that aren't worth millions and millions of dollars. So we have to value something because it is just becoming rare, like California condors or polar bears might be a good example. When you're talking about the ocean, it's a little bit hard to say that the ocean has scarcity value for everything, every resource that we can get from it. In general, the oceans are huge, so oceans aren't really super scarce. So you have to be really careful when you decide to say that the ocean has scarcity value, or the products that we're taking from the ocean have scarcity value. In some respects, we do have some fisheries that have become overfished, and that doesn't necessarily make the price of the fish go up. It just kind of diminishes the quantity that's available. So some other indirect values that we can associate with the ocean are things like aesthetic value and option value. Option value is a good one. We need to protect the health of the oceans now to make sure that they're there in the future. In the future, we definitely will value having oceans around. So the way that you think about values is tricky. Just kind of go through this exercise in your head of going through each of the things in the chart that's in chapter 1. There's a really good picture of direct and indirect values. Just go through each one of those as you think about a resource and try to come up with a reason why that value would be associated with the resource. So you pick a really good policy to talk about here. And as far as the policy tensions, the Clean Water Act, there's some policy tensions in the sense that pro-business politicians and advocates kind of sometimes feel like the Clean Water Act is inhibiting them from being able to create jobs and economic development. And then there's other policy tensions that are really interesting. Here in the city of San Diego, as associated with the Clean Water Act, we have a really, really big problem. One of those problems is the sewage treatment facility that services the entire city of about almost 3 million people is way outdated, and it pumps effluent, which means treated sewage water, into the ocean. And the city has a permit from the EPA to do that. However, the EPA has improved their standards, and the city has not been able to keep up. So the EPA continues to give the city of San Diego a special pass, meaning that they don't have to clean the effluent to current standards, because really, if they just didn't give the city the permit, then all this sewage would have absolutely nowhere to go. So in some respects, the city of San Diego and the policies that it creates as far as infrastructure development are at odds, and there's tension between that and the federal EPA regulations set forth by the Clean Water Act and the the pollution storm drain permit system. So we've got that, and what are you going to do? I mean, there's really nothing you can do except take away the permit and then have the entire city flooded with sewage. There's a lot going on with the Clean Water Act, and you could find a policy tension almost anywhere you look. The city of Flint, Michigan, for example, is another one. So the worldviews, you talk about biocentrism, and worldviews just kind of mean, like, when you're thinking about a policy, or really just life in general, you're either taking a human-centered point of view or you're taking a biocentric point of view. A good example is the Endangered Species Act. Very, very biocentric policy, putting endangered species and biodiversity at the center. And doesn't matter what sort of economic development might be slowed or halted, or what kind of jobs might be lost. That policy remains biocentric. Other policies tend to be anthropocentric in nature. The Clean Water Act is one of those. Just like I described the policy tension that's going on between the city of San Diego and the EPA. Really, we're not putting the oceans first and biodiversity in the oceans first. We're putting human needs first. So that's a very anthropocentric policy. And in many ways, that's what the Clean Water Act is. It allows people to pollute. We give them permits to pollute. So I don't believe that it's very biocentric in nature. All in all, you've got these concepts down really well, and I think you'll be fine. It is important to understand values more than anything. So just keep that chart from Chapter 1 handy, and as we go through the weeks, think about these values and how they might apply to different environmental resources, because that's coming up on your Week 2 paper, and it's going to come up on your final paper. All right? Nice job.